Good evening, everybody. My name's Lawrence Walsh. I'm the chair of the Planning Committee. You're very welcome. On my right is Councillor Aidan Williams, the vice chair. On my left are senior planning officers. On my further right are officers from legal, highways and democratic services. And down both legs of the table are members of council who make up this planning committee. I've got some notices to read to you before we begin. I would just like to convey a fire safety advice for this evening. If the fire alarm, a continuous siren sounds, please God I ask that you leave the building in a calm manner by the nearest fire exit by proceeding left out of the room and down the main stairwell and out of the main civic entrance, which is opposite. Everyone should assemble at the front of the town hall and must not re-enter the building until instructed to do so. If you have a disability which could affect your means of escape, could you please inform a member of staff so that arrangements can be made for your safe evacuation. I've got some broadcast information. Please be aware that this meeting will be recorded for live and for subsequent broadcasts on the Council's YouTube channel. The whole of the meeting will be recorded except where there are confidential or exempt items. This activity promotes democratic engagement in accordance with Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972. The cameras will focus on the proceedings of the meeting and avoid areas specifically designated for members of the public. If you object to being filmed, please remain seated in the public seating area. All members and officers must use the microphones provided to enable the audio to be picked up by the system. Members are reminded to turn off their microphones when they are not formally addressing the committee. And a notice on public recording. If any person present intends to photograph, film or record the meeting, would they please indicate now? We had an indication that somebody wanted to record the meeting this evening, but that's obviously not the case. So you do want to record the meeting, right? Okay, could you just listen to the next few words I'm going to say? Okay. Would any members of the public present who object to being filmed or photographed please identify themselves? So if you object to being filmed or photographed by members of the public, could you indicate? So nobody's indicated. Members of the public should be aware that they may be photographed, filmed or recorded by other members of the public. This is a statutory right and not a policy of the council. Unless you identify yourself as having an active objection to being photographed or filmed, the council cannot prevent it happening. So I hope everybody understands intending to photograph or film the proceedings. Please note those individuals and refrain from photographing or filming them. If children or vulnerable members of the community are present, I will instruct that they should not be filmed or photographed either. If those filming or photographing the proceedings ignore my instructions, would they please note I will be forced to withdraw the right to do so. Do you understand that issue? Okay. So we'll go to the agenda and attendances. I think we've got a full house tonight with no apologies. Councillor Carey's coming on the lane. That's good. Good to see you. Item number 2 is declarations of interest. Members to give notice of any personal prejudicial interest and the nature of that interest relating to any item on the agenda in accordance with the adopted code of conduct. Any members got any interest to declare? Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Chair. I attend the church that submitted the application for the Empress Street application. So I will leave the meeting at that point.
Thank you for that, Councillor Proctor. Councillor Dr. Barr.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a governor at the Boys Grammar School and I'll be leaving the meeting at that point. Thank you.
Thank you. And you, Councillor?
Thank you. I called in application for 122 Framingham Road and will be speaking tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, that's good. Item number 3 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of September. Would anybody like to move them as a true and correct record? Councillor Bunting, thank you very much. Item number 4 is questions from members of the public, and no questions have been submitted by the members of the public. Item 5 is the additional information report. Hope members of the public have had a chance to look at those. There's 1 or 2 copies at the front there next to the main agenda. And item number 6, before we go to agenda item 6, can I remind everybody, including myself, that as well as our local knowledge, we look to background papers listed at the beginning of agenda item 6 at the beginning of agenda item 6 as a basis for our decision making this evening. Everybody just looks, Councillor Menzies looking a bit puzzled there. So if you just look to agenda item 6 on your papers, in the booklet, you'll see the list of papers that the background papers. We have Trafford Local Plan, Core Strategy, the GM Joint Waste Development Plan. All those plans are very relevant this evening, and that's where our basis for our decision making comes from, as well as our local knowledge. Okay, so we're going to go to page 1. That's 9 Bow Green, Bowden, and we have 2 speakers this item. I don't know which one wants to go first. We take the person against first, Mr. Cameron Hurst. Let's take a seat. Before you begin, Dr. Alvey's in the audience. Dr. Alvey, hello. You'd asked me in the week whether we could defer this application, and I wanted to put it to the committee, but I was advised today to ask you again this evening if you would like this item to be deferred. Would you like this item to be deferred this evening? Sorry, say that again. It is a possibility. Right? Well, before we begin to speak, there should be a reason. Can we have a reason for that, Dr. Alvey? Okay, thanks for that. So the point I was making to Dr. Alvey, trying to make to him, was that I felt it was a decision for the committee to make whether we should defer this item. Any comments? Councillor Patel.
Can I just declare, and I think it's probably the same for all members, that I've had numerous voicemail messages and emails already from the applicant here, and I don't think it's for the applicant themselves to be directly emailing reports, information to us as committee members. So I don't see why that's his inability or his rushed approach to that should affect our ability to consider this application.
Thanks, Councillor Patel. Anybody else?
Phone call from Dr. Alvey, who did ask me to come down to have a discussion with him in relation to the application, and I did not respond.
Plenty of time to look at this, and with respect to Dr. Alvey, he did know that this meeting was taking place well in advance. He's known for some weeks the date and time of this meeting, and Dr. Alvey is well known to us. He's come to many planning committees, and he's very welcome to do so. But I don't see a reason to defer this application. I'd like it to be discussed this evening. That's my view. I've taken soundings from the committee. So without further ado, Mr. Hurst. Apologies again, Mr. Hurst. We've got an introduction from Ms. Colway.
Thank you, Chairman. A brief introduction from me. This application relates to an L-shaped plot of land on the corner of Bow Green Road to the west and Stanhope Road to the south. The plot accommodates the applicant's dwelling to the north of the site with a vacant area of the former garden to the south, the latter immediately adjacent to the road junction. The applicant proposes to erect a pair of semi-detached dwellings at the southern end of the plot, followed by the demolition of the current dwelling. The northern of the part of the plot to be subsequently redeveloped in accordance with a previous grant of planning permission for a further pair of semi-detached dwellings at this point. The key issues for consideration are the principle of residential development, together with the proposal's design, residential amenity, and highways or parking impacts. The proposal is reported to the Planning and Development Management Committee following receipt of letters of support from 7 separate addresses. The proposal has also elicited letters of objection from 26 separate neighbouring properties. The grounds of support focus on the provision of much needed residential accommodation, together with the proposal's design and sustainable location. The grounds of objection focus on the proposal's design and visual impact, together with its highways and parking impacts, as well as an objection to the applicant's repeated submission of multiple planning applications over the course of several years. Officers consider that the proposal, by reason of its height, scale, massing, design and proximity to the site boundaries, would result in an over-dominant and incongruous form of development on this prominent corner plot. This would be out of keeping with and cause significant harm to the street scene and the character and spaciousness of the surrounding area. The application is therefore recommended for refusal. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms Coley. Mr Hurst, finally. Thanks for your patience.
Good evening, members. I'm speaking against this application for the erection of a pair of semi-detached dwellings on behalf of neighbouring residents. Leaf Planning has been acting on behalf of local residents for a number of years, and we have objected to several applications proposed for this site. An application was withdrawn in September 2015, as it was considered that 8 dwellings on the wider site would form overdevelopment. However, the applicant has subsequently pursued the same number of dwellings in a piecemeal fashion. This application seeks to obtain 2 dwellings on this plot, which will then accomplish the 8 originally applied for in outline. We are pleased to see that the council has agreed that a further pair of semi-detached dwellings on this site would constitute overdevelopment of the wider plot, giving the following reasons. The development would result in an unacceptable visual impact with reference to its position within the plot, lack of surrounding space, overly large size, and poor design, and therefore would fail to comply with Local Plan Policy L7, PG1, and paragraph 122 of the NPPF. For the same reasons, the development would result in an overdominant and incongruous form of development on a prominent corner plot and would cause significant harm to the street scene and character and spaciousness of the surrounding area. We agree with the reasons and recommendations of the council, in particular the visual impact caused, albeit there are several other areas of concern which should be taken into account. Bowgreen Road is used as a cut-through for people travelling from Langham Road to the motorway network at Lymm Roundabout. We would ask members to consider the experience of local neighbours who have witnessed major accidents on the corner of Bowgreen Road and Stanhope Road, which required police assistance. There is an issue with drivers crossing Bowgreen Road at speed. In one case witnessed 5 years ago, 2 cars collided and 1 car being shunted into the wall of 9 Bowgreen Road. Both drivers were hospitalised. Another similar incident occurred whereby a car crashed into our client's garden. The introduction of further traffic on the corner, and indeed more cars reversing on and off new drives, will add to the chance of a further serious accident. It is noted that opposite 9 Bowgreen Road, 1 house has been converted into 3, which has already added to the issue of safety for neighbours and children who play in the street. We would ask that the council refuse the proposed development and resist the overdevelopment of this plot in the future. Thank you.
With 2 speakers in favour of the application, Councillor Churchill and Dr Alvey. I don't know which one wants to go first. Councillor Churchill. Just like to take a seat, and you have 5 minutes, Councillor Churchill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by thanking the committee for giving me the opportunity to speak in support of the planning application for the site at 9 Bowgreen Road in Bowden. The current application has been submitted after considerable thought by the applicant, Dr. Alvey, and with detailed consideration of the plot and the surrounding area. The applicant intends to live in one of the dwellings if the application is approved, and is therefore as keen as anyone to ensure that the proposal is not detrimental to the local area. The planning officer has highlighted the most important development plan policies in this case as being those controlling the supply of housing and those relating to the development's visual impact. In terms of the supply of housing, the proposal would result in the provision of much needed properties in the area at a suitable and sustainable residential location. It would create 2 additional family homes and would make an important contribution to the borough's housing requirements. This application also has many other commendable points, as highlighted by the planning officer in his report at paragraphs 30 to 54. In terms of residential amenity, for example, there are no significant concerns, with acceptable levels of privacy to neighbours and no undue overbearing or overshadowing impacts. It is accepted by the planning officer that any issues regarding the residential amenity of the surrounding properties could, in any event, be mitigated by conditions and are not in themselves grounds for refusal. Similarly, there are no concerns in terms of highways, with the local highways agency concluding that there would be no adverse impact on the surrounding network or on parking or services, even if the dwellings were used to full capacity. Nor would the development result in unacceptable harm to the natural environment. The refusal of the application then is essentially based on the design of the property and its effect on the character of the local area. The applicant argues that the development is in keeping with the character of the area and that it does not have a negative effect on the street scene. The main reason for this is that although it is a corner plot, it is heavily vegetated with high, dense banks of mature trees and other vegetation along the length of the Bowgreen Road boundary. This provides adequate screening and limits the visibility between the site and the street, and therefore the dwellings would not be intrusive in the street scene. The planning officer's report indicates at paragraph 21 that the applicant has recently removed a large number of trees and vegetation from the plot. He says that this would render the developments especially prominent. Dr. Alvey has informed me that this statement is factually incorrect and that this is not the case. The applicant has provided detailed written representations to the planning officer's report, which members of the committee will now have received. And this sets out examples of approved planning applications in the neighbouring area where minimum standards set out by the planning officer in this case, for example, in terms of boundary distance, have also been transgressed, but nevertheless, planning has been approved. In addition to this, I would point out that the proposed dwelling is only 1.9 metres closer to the corner of Bowgreen Road than the single dwelling for which planning permission has already been granted on the site. This means that for a relatively short extra width, 2 houses are created for the borough's housing supply instead of 1. In comparison to the approved semi-detached dwellings to the north and east of the site, the proposal would result in a relatively constrained area of development with a density of 25 dwellings per hectare, with the adjacent plots, approved plots, having densities of 33 dwellings per hectare. A substantial area of the dwellings are well positioned in the plot and maintain the spaciousness of the area. In conclusion, there are many positive elements to this application, in particular, the creation of 2 potential family homes, which would make an important contribution to the borough's housing requirements. The concerns around the impact on the street scene are mitigated with more than adequate screening and further screening if necessary. Dr. Alvey has cited a number of examples of properties contravening the minimum boundary standards cited to reject this application, where planning permission has nevertheless been granted. And I would ask the committee to give these points due consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Churchill. If you'd like to return to your seat. Dr. Alvey, like to come forward. And you have 3 minutes, Dr. Alvey. Thank you.
Planning decisions are not based on an exact science. Rather, they rely on informed judgment. In this case, the new national planning policy, of which 2 components are central to this application for 2 houses. Number 1, the presumption in favour of sustainable development Number 2, making effective use of land in meeting the need for homes. The general thrust of NPPF is the tilted balance, which gives express consideration to whether adverse impacts of granting planning would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. I would argue there are no adverse impacts that would outweigh the benefits for 2 houses. In planning decisions, consistency is key, and I quote from a judgment referenced in the email I've sent to members. One important reason why previous decisions are capable of being material is that like cases should be considered in a like manner, which I think you can see on the screen of the previous approvals on one of the slides. If you compare like for like, this is much smaller. On a corner plot 65 metres from the proposal on Stanhope, a 2-storey dwelling that comes within 1.8 metres of the boundary to Talbot Road was similarly resisted by Trafford Council, but subsequently allowed on appeal. On matters of planning judgments, the courts have noted that planning inspectorate should be considered analogue to an expert tribunal. Similarly, I draw your attention to the corner plot 38 Bowgreen Road. The expansive house, circa 24 metres wide, has recently received planning permission, and that comes within a metre of the boundary to the adjacent Ibrook Road. I'm now going to address some of the main points raised by the officer in recommending refusal. Height. Proposed ridge height is 11.4 metres. However, this is the same as the 11.5 metres recently approved for the semi-detached houses on the adjacent plot to the north. I quote from the officer's report. 11.5 metres is not considered excessive for dwellings in this area and is comparable to both height of previously approved properties on the site and existing adjacent properties in the area. End quote. The massing and scale of the 2 proposed houses are actually less than those previously approved 3 semi-detached properties that have planning. For example, the width of this application is 13 metres. Those have 15 metres, so it's significantly smaller. So you can't argue on massing and scale. Design, from the slides you're watching, it's obvious considerable thought and expertise has been invested to provide 2 actively designed dwellings. I don't think it's fair to say these houses are poorly designed. In fact, we spent a year on design. And when the slide comes up, if you're able to compare at the bottom of the 3 previously approved dwellings and you compare it to the top, you can see proportionately what the differences are, and those have been approved. Thank you very much, committee.
Thank you, Dr. Alby. If you'd like to return to your seat. Any members wish to comment? Councillor Cordingley.
Thanks, Chair. I think this is a difficult one because it's not a conservation area. And despite that, in some ways, I feel that in some ways we're being overly, the corner plot, I need to state straight away, I do have problems over the design, but in terms of distance from the curtilage, I cycled there yesterday and I saw lots of properties that were far closer to the edge of the site than this one. So I don't have a problem with that particularly. There's one just on the corner of Bowgreen Road, just as you go up towards, I think it's Talbot or Langham, I can't remember, but just going up the hill that seems far closer to the curb than this one. So I don't have a problem there. It's not, I don't think we've served that area particularly well in planning in terms of what's been allowed on that road. We seem to have created something of an inconsistent road as it stands now. So I don't have a problem with that. I do, however, have problems with the design, and I do back up the planning officers in terms of the actual bay windows and things like that. I think in some ways we're quite keen on raising the standards of design in the council, and this is something we need to get a little bit clearer on than we have been hitherto, because if you look down either Stanbrook or Bow Green, I don't think we've applied any consistency at all in terms of what's been built there. I thought it lacked character. But yes, so I don't agree with the condition, the reason for refusal, distance from the curtilage. I really do not. And just to echo that, at the same time as I'm looking at that, the recent award of the best design in Britain showed a row that was right up against. And would that be suitable there? These council houses in Norwich, I think they'd be perfectly suitable at that corner, right against the wall. So I don't buy that distance. In fact, I think that served to sort of undermine the road, that consistency of planning line. It hasn't helped that road, but it isn't a great design, and I back up the officer's report on in terms of the design.
Councillor Bunting, wish to comment?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll agree with some of that which has just been said, but not all of it. I think I'm closer to the officer's position than the previous speaker. I think I will agree. Whilst there may be properties that are closer to the boundary in various other locations, it's not just about, well, you've got to take it in terms of the overall context and the site layout that you've got there, and the fact that it's a very prominent corner, and the fact that it's somewhat raised as well. And you can point out to various other properties that you can point out other properties in the area that may not be fantastic, but as the applicant himself has pointed out, not all of those properties were put there at our behest. We have unfortunately had some designs imposed upon us. So I do think that given the location and the street layout and the size of the property and its proximity to the corner, I will agree overall with the officer conclusion in terms of the single reason for refusal. The only thing I wanted to clarify, if I may, through you, Chairman, is there was something of a dispute in relation to the highways issues. Now, I know obviously highways is not a reason for refusal at this stage, but just for benefit not only of the committee but also those who are listening in the audience, I don't know if you would be happy for the highways officers to clarify that point, because one speaker said that this is a terribly dangerous corner with multiple accidents involving vehicles, even hitting boundary walls and all the rest of it. The other speaker said that this was not an issue. Now, obviously, we've not identified it as a reason for refusal, and I'm not suggesting that it necessarily should be, but perhaps that should be a point to be clarified. And then if I may say a word or two after that, that'd be great. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Evanson, like to comment?
Yes, Chair. Unfortunately, I don't have the accident records associated with the junction in question. Nothing. We weren't aware of any particular. I don't know what the accident record is at that junction. Apologies for that.
You don't have an issue with the new entrance that's proposed on Stanhope?
No, we have had some discussions with the applicant and pushed it away from the actual junction as far as possible. And we have a notional distance from the junction, which is 15 metres, which, as demonstrated on the slide just now up, he has achieved the 15 metres. So we had a bit of a debate regarding that. But in terms of vehicles entering and leaving the site in a forward gear, some years ago that requirement somewhat disappeared through manual for streets, and this type of road, we don't believe that that's what would be necessary on this category of road, unfortunately. But unfortunately, I don't have to hand the accident records for that junction.
Councillor Bunting, you want to come back?
If I may, very briefly, Chairman, now that I've satisfied myself in terms of the highways position, I'm happy to propose that we accept officer recommendation and refuse on this single point only. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Anybody else like to comment? Councillor Dr. Babb.
Thank you, Chairman. It is a really, really difficult planning application. I understand the benefits of having two houses where there was previously one, and the current site is really in need of improvement. It looks very old and very tired. So on the one hand, I can totally understand Dr. Alves' desire to have two homes on that site. However, some of the mitigating factors that have been raised are not really very reassuring in terms of planning. We've been told that there's other sites in other parts of the borough that have had various things accepted that are found to be unacceptable with this application. But we know as a committee that there is no such thing as a precedent, and that every property is considered in its own way with its own unique set of circumstances. So unfortunately, we can't really take any comfort from that. And then the other proposal that was put forward as mitigation is very enticing, but unfortunately can't really accept that. And that's that the screening will help to mask anything that looks out of proportion and doesn't contribute well to the street scene. But we know that the screening can come down, properties can change hands, trees can be cut down if there's no protection orders on them. So unfortunately, can't really rely on that either. So although I would really like to support the application, Dr. Alves' application, I'd like to see him have his homes there. As with other members of the committee, I do think it needs a better design so that we don't have to rely on the mitigating factors that don't really hold water in planning terms. So unfortunately, I will be accepting officer's recommendation to refuse. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Barclay. Anybody else? Councillor Patel.
I feel like I'm erring. It is a difficult one. Looking at the planning history on the site is almost exhausting. But it does appear that this is a sort of a sequential approach to perhaps what the applicant always wanted and perhaps has previously been refused. But I can understand if you own that site, why you would want to maximise the development you get from it. I visited the site too. I disagree with my colleague, Councillor Cordingley. I did see a theme and a character, but what I do accept is it's a reflection of individual properties that have evolved over time. So it's an unusual, unique street that has evolved as individual properties. And I can see a character and I can see a spacing of the houses. And I think that this proposal does push beyond what is acceptable in design terms. Dr. Alves eloquently summarised the MPPF sort of requirements, but I do trust officers that they have reviewed that and made a very balanced decision on that basis. So yes, I'm inclined to support the officer's recommendation here.
Thank you, Councillor Patel. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to start really by thanking Dr. Alves, Mr. Hurst and Councillor Churchill for their representations. I'm conscious that Dr. Alves put a huge amount of effort into trying to communicate with us, and I received an extremely lengthy document from him yesterday. I appreciate everything that he said about prior planning permissions in different locations, but I think as Councillor Dr. Barclay said, we're here to determine this application on its own individual merits. So really I wouldn't comment any further on them. As I see it, ultimately we've received 26 letters of objection to the application, which refer to overdeveloped. The officers have reached a conclusion that is in agreement with the letters of objection. Paragraphs 22 to 26 quite thoroughly document the fact that officers have determined that the application would be an overdevelopment of the site. Paragraph 27 refers to the application being too high and therefore too dominant. And paragraphs 28 to 29 refer to the design features and say that they don't think it's in keeping with the local area. Ultimately, I think when I looked at the site, it probably could accommodate a pair of semi-detached properties, and I think Councillor Patel sort of indicated that that was her view too. But this is just not the application that can deliver that. So as a consequence, I won't be supporting this application. I'll be voting in accordance with officer recommendation, and I will second that recommendation formally. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Williams. Anybody else? Councillor Minnis.
It's more a question, really. So do we have, as it were, imaginary building lines going down, so going down Stanhope Road and going up Bowgreen Road? Because is that how we're saying the massing is too much and it's because it blocks off the corner, you know, vision, seeing around the corner? Is that part of it? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, there is a consideration of the building line, but it's a matter of planning judgment. And in this case, it's considered that the movement towards the building line and towards the property frontages is too far and makes this particular development too prominent.
Don't disagree. It's just a question. The other thing is that when you look, well, the right hand house has got, the garden is extremely small at the back compared to the size of the property. Don't we have a set size of garden to property, don't we? Yes. Okay, that's fine. Don't worry. Thank you.
Councillor Minnis is talking about something I was thinking about. It is a fine balance, this application, and we want to get every application right. So we discuss it. However fine it is, we will come to the right decision. Because Dr. Albee, the application is trying to fit it into that site, I think they sacrificed that back garden that Councillor Minnis is talking about. The boundary between these two houses are back to back. That boundary next door to that second plot, if I can call it that, is very, very tight. Yes. And I think that's had to happen. That what gives me the indication that it doesn't fit on the site. Councillor Williams said perhaps two properties can fit there, but these are just too big, I think. Now I'll be voting with the officer's recommendation to refuse. If there's no more comments, it's been moved and seconded that we refuse this application. All those in favour of refusal, please show. And those against, Councillor Cordins wants to make a comment.
I do make a distinction between, I do want to refuse, but not on the grounds of officers. But I thought the proximity to the front was the bulk of the building. I agree with in terms of the officer's recommendation, but in terms of proximity to the boundary of the property, I don't agree. I think that a property could fit there that's right to the front. So if that's two conditions, then I drop one.
From our legal side, how would we drop one? Do Councillor Cordin need to move a motion to support his? Yeah, you need a seconder for that, Councillor Cordin. We'll take a vote on it.
Yeah, so I propose that.
Okay.
If I don't get a second,
okay. Would anybody like to second Councillor Cordin's? No. Okay, so that falls, Councillor Cordin. Okay, so that application has been refused. Thank you, everybody. We're going to go to page 18. Page 18, that's Empress Street in Old Trafford, and we've got speakers in favour of this application. We've got Councillor Taylor and Mr. Phil Smith. I don't know which one wants to go first. Mr. Smith or Councillor Taylor? Mr. Smith. Before you begin, Mr. Smith, we've got an introduction from Ms. Coley.
Thank you. This application relates to an existing brick and metal clad two-storey building with a metal corrugated roof located on the north side use. The surrounding area is predominantly B1 office use. Permission is sought for change of use of the building from B8 to D1 community centre or place of worship, incorporating a large auditorium to accommodate up to 450 people, with minor external alterations to create a glazed frontage inside the existing roller shutter protected opening. The proposed site is to be used by Vine Life, an independent church which has been operating in Manchester for almost 3 decades, with a combined congregation of approximately 400 regular adults and over 150 children from households across Greater Manchester and the wider North West region. Vine Life runs a programme of community outreach work alongside its weekly church services, and it is acknowledged that the proposal would provide welcome facilities within this regeneration area. The main issues to be considered, however, relate to the loss of the existing employment use on this employment site, together with an impact on neighbouring business, residents, parking and highways. Officers consider that the application fails to justify the loss of the existing employment use and at the same time justify the need for a church in this particular location when it serves a congregation from a much wider area. The proposal falls significantly short of car parking standards and instead relies on parking provided in the adjacent Empress Street car park, which is outside of the control of the applicant and cannot be relied upon to continue to provide public parking. It's recommended the application is refused on the grounds of the loss of the employment land, detrimental to the primary function of the area, and also contrary to the council's provision requirements, and also on the grounds of under provision for off-street parking to the detriment of neighbouring businesses and other road users. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Colway. Mr. Smith, you have 3 minutes.
Councillors, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of our planning application. To give you some context, we have been a local Christian church in Manchester for 30 years, primarily gathered and worked in the communities of Hale and Russia, which are about 2 miles away from the building on Empress Street. In addition to serving those local areas, we've also been committed to supporting the homeless in the city centre, with the majority of those years taking teams out weekly to get alongside those who find themselves on the streets. We have a track history of supporting and serving the local community, specifically when we redeveloped the Framingham Road with Arms about 7 years ago. It's now the thriving Anchor Coffee House, which has become a real community asset. In there, we've housed a range of activities to the local communities, like after schools clubs, serving 2 of the local high schools. There's been food bank, youth groups, children's parties, community events, refugee private work schemes. The Children's Hospital, which is across the road, is used at various fundraising events, as well as bringing employment and regenerating an old rundown building for the local community to use and enjoy. So I hope having a church community space in the Clifford ward is that we can start the brilliant work of serving and supporting the local community in this area. In fact, one of the most exciting things about this journey is we've had the opportunity to meet with local ward councillors and discovered how we can support them, how we can support and serve the local community, and create an incredibly valuable community space in an area where there's one that currently doesn't exist. Having their support has made us fully committed to pursuing this opportunity. The church has met in rented spaces for the last 30 years, and it's time for us to be able to put down some roots, and in doing so become more effective in our desire to love and serve this brilliant city. The planner's report does mention the public car park, which we hope to make use of. This car park has been used almost exclusively for over a decade by Williams BMW at no cost or issue. What I hope is that you can take the view that this car park, which is intrinsically linked to the building, would simply continue to be used for public parking by ourselves on a Sunday, and therefore give us ample parking provision in a car park that's completely empty on a Sunday. We would continue to offer our support and help towards maintaining and taking care of this car park, given that there is current issues with drug use and blighting. Alongside this, we also are bringing comparable employment numbers to the site, and we hope for this employment to increase over the coming years. We also see our proposed use bringing valuable benefit to the community that currently does not exist, and I'm pleased that the planning officer recognises this. So my hope, therefore, is that in your consideration of our application, you be granted this change of use. And so I thank you, councillors, for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. If you'd like to return to your seat. Councillor Taylor. I'd like to take a seat, and you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I would like to speak in favour of this application. Vine Life Church have presented a bold vision of repurposing a bit. This represents a brave venture into an area which is badly in need of investment and regeneration. As we've heard, Vine Life are a well-established community church with high standards of governance in place and a strong track record of outreach, community involvement and collaboration. This neighbourhood has suffered from economic and social decline for many years. Over the decade, I have been a councillor for Clifford Ward. There has been no development in this location. It is Vine Life's desire to bring not only a place of worship to the area, but also to develop a thriving community hub that will serve and be inclusive for the entire community in this district. They are very much an outward-looking organisation, and it is their vision to offer opportunities for growth, development and employment for a range of individuals and groups. Whilst this building has until recently housed a vehicle storage unit, there is very little in the way of other employment and economic activity on this site or in the vicinity. It comprises of large areas of dereliction, which serves as a magnet for crime and antisocial behaviour. Currently, there are no other viable plans in existence for economic development and regeneration in this area. It appears to me quite perverse to refuse a well-considered proposal which would bring economic activity into the area when there are no other alternative plans afoot, thus allowing the area to fall into further decline. Additionally, this development would not present any threat to the Empress Conservation Area. The issue of car parking has been raised as a reason for refusal of planning. However, there is a large car park owned by Trafford Council adjacent to the proposed church building. Surely an arrangement, contract, memorandum of understanding could be established between Trafford Council and Vinelife to allow usage of this car park at times of worship and during centre opening times. Indeed, Vinelife have offered to pay £3,000 per annum to maintain this car park. Indeed, we have a 75,000-seater stadium less than a mile away in a very densely populated area. There aren't the same number of car parking spaces provided on that site. Key occupancy times would be on a Sunday morning, the quietest point of the week in terms of other vehicles and users requiring access to the area. And again, Vinelife have highlighted that they would invoke a special event parking plan should the auditorium required to be used to its full capacity. This proposal has received considerable support from a number of community and charitable organisations as laid out in your documentation. There have, to my knowledge, been no letters of opposition. If allowed to come to fruition, this development would be a tremendous asset to the community. I urge you to support this development to allow much needed regeneration and community development to occur in this location. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Right to return to your seat. Ms. Cole is going to give us some information. Ms. Cole.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I just, it is in the report, but in terms of the council's use of the car park, it's not for this committee to consider whether the council should offer a lease to Vinelife or not. In making your decision, you should assume that that car park is not available because you are making a planning decision, not a decision to whether or not to offer that car park to this church. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Collier. Any comments? Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to agree with officer recommendation in relation to this one. Now, whilst I might be very sympathetic towards the church, whilst I'm in no way dispute the worthiness of their cause or the benefit of their activity that they may carry out, this is not a committee that is involved in sort of determining the moral worthiness of an application. It's not our job to decide if a church is a beneficial or worthy thing to support. We're here to deal with the planning application and only the planning application. In terms of the two reasons for refusal, the first one is fairly self-evident. This is an employment area as laid down within the core strategy. That's what this area has been designated for. We do need employment areas. The existing building is not dysfunctional in terms of employment. With time, I'm sure there may be other employers that are happy to use that site. So the idea that it is beyond the pale and can't be used for any other employment is, in my view, not correct. So that is a valid reason for refusal under the rules that we have to determine this application by. The second reason for refusal, Mrs. Coley has just hit the nail on the head. It was a point I was going to make myself. An overflow to the facility. If it had most of the car parking it required and just needed some overflow, you could maybe make an argument that you could go and seek an overflow site, and but even then they would need to get some sort of agreement in place. Having the entire bar two anyway, the entire parking facility provided off-site in a way that cannot be guaranteed or necessarily sustained. We cannot say what will happen to that car park in the future. It is not part of the area that we're dealing with the planning application for. I think is unreasonable. We have what is a need for 115 parking spaces, and we have provided 2. we have had fairly vigorous arguments in this committee, Chairman, over far smaller gaps in car parking agreements and that there. So to try and put it on that basis, I think either one of these two reasons would be a valid reason for refusal. If either one of these two reasons were present, that would cause me to look to refuse this application. The fact we have two very strong reasons, despite the mitigating arguments that were put forward, the worthiness of their cause and the good works they do, I do not dispute these, but these are not things that we are here to determine tonight. This is a planning committee, not a morality committee. So on those grounds, Chairman, I feel there is very little option here with regard to this application. I will be proposing that we accept officer recommendation and refuse for the reasons that are laid down in the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. I think when you visit this site, it's really obvious that it's crying out for regeneration and investment. What I did want to comment on, though, is just that I have similar reservations to Councillor Bunting, but solely in respect of parking provision at the site. It's not particularly easy to navigate as it is when I tried to drive around there. And I have this mental image of sort of 150 vehicles arriving en masse and trying to barter with one another to essentially park up. Now, I appreciate that the applicant has essentially said that planning conditions could be attached to how many attendees would be allowed to attend a service at any one time. And I think page 8 of the AOR, the additional information report, addresses that and refers to that. But as I see it, Trafford can't realistically enforce a planning condition like that. It's not for council officers to be made available to stand outside a service on a weekly basis, counting people in and out. I just don't think it's practicable. It's actually quite unusual. I mean, I've been on the committee for over a year now, and it is quite unusual that we get such a strong steer from the Highways Department when they have concerns about parking provision. And I think paragraphs 36 through 50 of the report were really quite comprehensive. So I'm minded at this point to side with officer recommendation and to defer to their expertise, but I will keep an open mind, having said that, and listen to what other members of the committee have to say. Perhaps they can sway me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Cordingley.
I don't know if this is appropriate, but I'm taking the opposite view. I'm going to be contrary tonight. I can see it. I know this area well, and it's been deprived of people for a long time, pretty much since, if anybody remembers, Parker's bulbs were the last major attraction to this area. It will tolerate a certain amount of cars. It needs something to set that place going again. It's not far from Pomona. It needs a trigger, and I think this is going to be an ideal trigger, primarily because it'll be mainly focused on Sundays, and I just think it's important for this area to have people back in it in any description. So I'm going to propose that we accept the planning permission.
Thank you, Councillor Cordingley. To switch your microphone off. Anybody else like to comment? Councillor Winstanley.
I'm also going to be contrary because I also know the area quite well. And when I went and did the site visit, yes, it's an employment area. It's very run down. There's no real centre to it. There was an awful lot of people milling about and fly tipping going on at the time I visited the place. And the way development is spreading out in the centre of Manchester and also coming sideways from Moss Side into that area, I cannot believe that this is not going to be subsumed as housing sometime in the very near future. That was obviously a decision to be made by the planning team. The issue of parking, to me, it would be there has to be a way around this. I'm not sure that the amount of cars and traffic that were generated would be a reason sufficient enough to turn this down. So I speak very, very, very firmly in favour of of not accepting the officer's proposal and allowing the development. Thank you, Chair.
Are you seconding Councillor Cordley's
Indeed, I am.
Yeah. Councillor Stennett?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'm very much aware of the work that the Vine Street is doing in the community and in the wider Greater Manchester. Coming into Trafford with that vision is very good. I was there today, and this is the third time that I've gone to look at the site. It needs something there. But the parking situation, as has been flagged up this evening, is of great concern. And I'm not sure if we could go back, I'm just asking, to look if anything could be done to remedy that situation, which I think is very impossible. And based on that, I will have to go with the officer's recommendation.
Switch your microphone
Yes,
off, Councillor
certainly.
Stennett. Okay. Do you want to comment on what Councillor Stennett said, Ms. Coley?
If I mean, we've had a proposer and a seconder for the alternative recommendation, so we will be going for a vote on that. I hear the reasons that are being given, that they consider that it would serve the community well. Is that correct? And that don't believe that the parking situation would be so severe that would warrant a reason for refusal. Okay, that's fine. Just to make the committee aware then that in following the recommendation to approve, obviously we would need to think of some planning conditions, but given the enforceability of the numbers, that would be granting permission for a 450 capacity auditorium with 2 parking spaces. That's effectively what you'd be granting planning permission for. So as long as the committee understand that, then that's fine, because we wouldn't be imposing a numbers limit, because we couldn't. And we cannot also impose a condition requiring the use of the council car park, because we can't. That's a matter for the council as landowner, and outside of the control of this committee. Okay, thank you, Chairman.
I think that last sentence of yours, Ms. Cole, is what I think Councillor Stennett was trying to look into, the possibility of the car park, but it is out. The point we're trying to say, Councillor Stennett, it's out the remit of this planning committee. We can't go into negotiations about the use of the car park by the church, and they do that with valid reasons, but it's not for this committee to decide. Councillor Morgan, you've been very patient.
Thank you, Chair. I've come to the committee tonight quite torn. I do appreciate the excellent work that Ms. Smith said that the church does, but these weren't planning points. And I also do appreciate that it's very difficult to find locations for worship. But the point around parking just keeps on coming back to me. Again, the report mentions it, but there's no way that we could enforce, or that someone would be turned away from worship, even if it goes over 450. So reluctantly, I will have to be supporting the officer's recommendation and not supporting the application tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Minnis.
I'm on similar line. The two reasons. The employment thing, I'm not actually concerned about, because I think it brings something good to the area. It's a real shame about the parking, and I think that, in all fairness, you can't have something that's going to draw up to 400 odd people and have 2 car parking spaces. I mean, I'd love everyone to cycle there. Very much a fan. But so I think that I'm going to have to go with the officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Barclay.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it is a really, really difficult application, particularly as obviously we all want to see places of worship be in our borough and thrive and serve the community. They are such valuable institutions, and they do bring such fantastic things to residents. But it is really difficult when we hear about the parking, like Councillor Minnis. The employment issue isn't so great for me, because I think people are more important than the machines that are being stored in the building at the moment. So it really, that isn't it. But I think in very stark terms, the lack of parking is really heartbreaking. But we've, as someone else has said, we've worried about far better ratios of parking than this. I mean, this is absolutely extreme. And I think that it would be very, very difficult to approve an application with such a massive shortfall. But I would also like to say I really do admire the effort of the church and really understand and appreciate the support that it's got from the ward councillors. It must have been a really fantastic project to have secured that support. I know that myself. So really reluctantly, I do have to go with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Patel.
Genuinely torn. Visiting the site is it's blindingly obvious that it would really be a real boost to the area. This investment, this uplift. I don't accept Councillor Bunting's notion that it's a moral crusade. I think it's tangible physical investment in a very derelict area. Like others, I don't consider the loss of employment land to be that significant. I can't see a future, a long-term future in employment terms for that site. I could see it potentially turning into residential, and this community use is far more beneficial than that. Could we have not got to a place to this committee where I realise this isn't a planning consideration, where some sort of meaningful negotiation had gone on between the church and the council as some sort of actual agreement about the use of this car park? Is that, it seems such a shame that that hasn't been able to be negotiated between these parties, and that would have given me a lot more confidence to go with Councillor Cordingley's suggestion that we accept this application. To sit here and say that we will accept a 400-person venue with 2 car parking spaces it goes against everything I consider that is my role here on the planning committee, and that is with a lot of regret, because it looks like an amazing opportunity for that part of Old Trafford.
Councillor Cordingley.
I'd like to throw in a rhetorical question. Is there any church in Trafford that would actually meet current parking standards?
Okay, Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to make 2 brief points. First is just a point in terms of the parking issue. Well, as we've already said, this is a church that serves a wide area. It's not a church that draws its congregation from an intensely localised area, as is sometimes the case. So the chances of people, as my colleague over there said, sort of cycling in or walking is fairly remote, given the fact they're going to be travelling some significant distance, a lot of them. In terms of the other issue, in terms of the employment area, and people say, well, it's going to become a residential zone anyway. Well, if it did, that would simply escalate the problem even further, because then the whole argument, oh, well, doesn't matter, nothing happens there on a Sunday anyway, would go straight out of the window. I think we are falling into a politician's trap at this point. The argument, something must be done. Well, this is something, therefore, let's do this. That is often a very flawed argument and incorrect principle to follow. And I stand by the comments that I made earlier. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Jerome.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to respond to Councillor Minister's point. There are actually 58 cycle parking spaces when there only needs to be a requirement for 42. So I think on that point, they've actually done quite a good thing, really. But I am troubled by the amount of car parking, and I'd also back up similar points that Councillor Bunting has made about it being a church and having such a wide pool in a wide area and then out again over a short time span. So I am going to agree with the officer's recommendation about the parking and the employment issues. I think they're both valid. So I will be refusing the application.
Thank you, Councillor Jerome. Councillor Carey.
Thank you, Chairman. I will very succinctly just say that I will be supporting the officer's recommendation due to the 2 points in the report based on employment and the parking problems, and from the comments I've heard this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carey. It's been, Councillor Winstanley, you want to come in?
Just to say, this is not a politician's solution. This would be a good solution for the site. I totally understand the issues around parking, but this is not. We must do something. Let's do this. This would be a good solution. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we grant this application. All those in favour of granting the application, please show. And those against? That application is not granted. I think we need to take the refusal. Has anybody seconded refusal? Councillor Bunting proposed refusal. Anybody second? Councillor Carey? Seconding refusal. All those in favour of refusal of the application, please show. And those against? The application has been refused. Thank you, everybody. Just make yourself comfortable before you start. Miss Milner's going to give us an introduction.
Thank you, Chair. The application site comprises a mainly two-storey bar restaurant building that is currently vacant, with single-storey elements abutting Crown Passages and local authority car park. The site lies adjacent to Hale District Centre and the Hale Station Conservation Area. Permission was granted in October 2018 for the refurbishment and extension of the building, incorporating an external first floor terrace dining area and ground floor external dining area. The current application is made under Section 73 for a minor material amendment to the approval, seeking to vary the approved plans. The application seeks to vary the approved plans to accommodate changes to the external appearance of the building, including extensions to either side of the building, to the main roof, to the materials, and also to the main front gable elevation. It will retain both ground floor and first floor external eating areas. The main issues considered relate to the design and impact on amenity and also the highway network. Consideration is also given to the impact of the development on the nearby Hale Station Conservation Area. We have received 8 objections as outlined in your report and an additional objection received yesterday. The objections relate to noise and disturbance coming from the bar restaurant, the potential overlooking and lack of privacy from the outdoor seating areas, and general noise and disturbance from comings and goings to the site into the late hours. All of this is detailed in your report. Officers are satisfied that there would be no adverse impacts on the highways and parking. And in regards to the terrace, we would retain, as with the previous approval, that the first floor external terrace is only granted a 1-year temporary permission to allow officers to continue to monitor the impact of that. However, we are satisfied that, subject to appropriate conditions as set out in your report, that it would be acceptable in design terms and impact on amenity, and furthermore that there would be no impact on the adjacent conservation area. We've been specifically asked about the consultation process for this application, and it's been raised that the consultation with local members of the community has not been carried out correctly. However, I'd like to confirm that the Council's adopted statement of community involvement, which sets out how the Council will consult on planning applications, has been followed in strict accordance. Specifically, this is an application for an amendment to a previous approval, and therefore we are required to make sure that everybody consulted on the previous application has equally been consulted on the current application. That has been carried out, and the first application also was carried out in accordance with the statement of community involvement. Therefore, subject to conditions in your report, we do recommend approval.
Thank you, Ms Milner. Councillor Haddad, you have 5 minutes.
In support of this application. The building has had a long history, being originally built as a smithy. The building over the years has been altered and extended to form a long, uniform and uninspiring block, which is now in a dilapidated state and has been for several years. In the 90s, the building was developed into one large restaurant and bar and has since been operated in various styles. Italian, Indian, bistro, and more recently as Hogan's, a large bar and club. Following Hogan's closure, planning permission was granted in October 2018, just 1 year ago, for Hickory's Bar and Grill to extend and operate a large restaurant. However, this company decided not to trade in Hale. This application now seeks to make variations to the Hickory's consent obtained to allow for the subdivision of the building into a number of small units. As tenants take up space, a change of use consent will later be required to accommodate smaller retail users. The development will revert back to its former address of Crown Passages and is designed to attract small businesses and will resemble a small parade of shops. The proposal to alter the external appearance of this building to create a parade of small units is more than welcomed by all 3 ward councillors. The external design seeks to break up the front elevation to create a new varied street scene using different material to distinguish individual units. The much needed landscaping and tree planting is welcomed in addition to this area. The developer has ensured that the immediately adjacent neighbours will not be troubled by noise or disturbance by adhering to the strict conditions previously attached to the Hickory's application. This development comes at a time when Hale is in need of an economic retail boost, having suffered more recently from the success of Altrincham. The development, together with the building of a new library and community centre, is of great benefit to the community and will hopefully give Hale a fresh impetus. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Haddad. Well timed. You'd like to return to your seat. Mr. Groves, you'd like to take a seat, and you have 3 minutes, Mr. Groves.
Thank you, Chairman, members. My name is John Groves and I'm the applicant's planning consultant. The site, as you've heard, has a long-standing use as a food and drink and live entertainment establishment. It has for many years operated as a single large restaurant with late-night drinking and dancing. My clients bought the site in September 2018, inheriting a planning permission to alter and extend the building into one large restaurant, then to be operated by Hickory's Bar and Grill. The inherited permission clearly accepted the existing use, taking into account the building's history. Hickory's restaurant proposed to upgrade and alter the building into a large restaurant and were happy to accept additional conditional controls to the building's established use, which is supposed to be repeated through the application before you. In the event, Hickory's Bar and Grill decided not to proceed. My clients purchased the building with the intention of subdividing the building into smaller commercial units, and this application now seeks to vary the Hickory's permission to that end. My clients are a well-established landlord in Hale Village and are particularly sensitive to the need to maintain and enhance the retail offer and support village vitality. My clients do not see any need for the current large restaurant facility at this location. The proposed variations are designed to reduce the eating and drinking area and to create spaces that will be in demand by small retailers and service providers. This is the first phase in achieving that, and that gives the ability to present physical accommodation to prospective tenants. It is likely that further planning applications will be required for individual changes of use to each unit and bring further controls available to the council. Importantly, this development addresses the concerns of near neighbours, which relate largely to historic operation of the site. Their concerns are about noise and problems that have come from the officer's report addresses these concerns and suggests that they are dealt with by adhering to conditions attached to the original planning permission, which we're happy to accept and continue. We would commend the officer recommendation to you on this basis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Groves. If you'd like to return to your seat. Councillor Bunting, you'd like to? Have you indicated? All right. I was a bit quick off the mark there. Councillor Williams.
There we go. Thank you, Chair. I don't intend to speak too long to this application. As I understand it, the application is before committee because of the number of representations we've received. Yeah, I think it might be 9 now. I think it was highlighted by the two speakers. The site in question has a long-standing use as a essentially, it's been a restaurant, a nightclub, a bar for decades now, as far as I can recall. So whilst I appreciate that residents will be concerned, residents in the immediate area, about impact upon amenity, I don't think it's reasonable for the committee to refuse the application before us tonight on the basis that the use in question is long-standing. And outside of that, I think the report has outlined a really strong set of conditions to be attached to the permission. So pages 49 through 53, they're robust conditions, and I think the council's worked as hard as it can to protect that question of amenity. So I will be supporting the application before us tonight, and I will propose that we vote in line with officer recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Anybody else? Before you bring you in, Councillor Bunting, my concern had been an open area on the site for drinking, and but I understand it's around at the side, more facing the car park. Councillor Miss Milne is going to give me some clarity.
Yes, so there is a slide that will go up now that will show, I've tried to highlight in yellow. So this was the approval that we granted in October 2018. In yellow, it highlights the outdoor seating areas, and these would be all facing the car park. Click onto the next one, sorry. And this is as proposed. So what I would say, the first floor external seating areas, they're reconfigured, but they're not as deep. At ground floor, the seating is only along the boundary shown on this application. However, there could be outdoor seating throughout the ground floor, but this is restricted through the condition and would also be subject to licensing. So it is all on the car park side. There is no external areas adjacent to the rear of Cecil Road, which I think was the specific concern.
Thank you for that, Miss Milner. So I was worried about the residents on 41, 45, 45A, that would be right on top of them, but it isn't. It's round the corner. So I'm very comfortable with this application, but I'm obviously interested in what members have got to say. Councillor Bunting.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As I indicated a minute ago, I wasn't planning on saying very much on this one, but just to briefly, as no one else wishes to, looking through the objections that have been raised, they do appear to have been far more objections in relation to the previous usage than the existing use that is put forward now. I think people had simply heard, oh, that site's going to be developed. They'd taken into account what it was previously. They'd automatically jumped to the conclusion, oh, it's simply a rebirth of what was there before. This is quite a different proposal. As you say yourself, there is some outdoor seating area, but that's fairly limited. It's facing the car park only. It's not affecting any of the other areas. And as your Vice Chairman has already pointed out, there are a very strong set of conditions applied to this one. Also, as the applicant has raised as well, there are, as additional units come into activity, needless to say, there will be further applications which will allow us to get further control exactly what happens on there. So based on that brief summary, I can see no real reason to refuse this one. It's the first relatively straightforward item that we've had on the agenda this evening, and as your Vice Chairman has proposed officer recommendation, I am more than happy to second it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Anybody else? Councillor Proctor.
Yeah, I also very happy to go along with the officer recommendations for this. I think they're good plans. These, I think they would enhance the area and help the economic region, and the changes are appropriate to the area. And I don't think they'll particularly cause any major harm to the residents in the area. I think, as we've said, that they will be very much guarded from that. I think looking at the complaints that have come through in the report,
most of those seem to be about noise, particularly, and parking. I think neither of those will be a major issue here. I think they've been mitigated by the conditions attached to the report. So I think all those are unfounded, really. And I don't think any concerns that the residents have are significant enough to us to refuse this application. I think we should be going on with that. It's good to hear that the local councils are also supporting this application as well, which is something good to know that they're supporting this, and there's no real major problems in the area. So I'll be supporting this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Proctor. Anybody else? Just remind me, Ms Miller, which condition it is the 1 year temporary?
So it's condition 2. So we have slightly amended it because the previous one just said it gave them a year, but we accept that giving them a year from today might mean they're not even open yet. So
it's been moved and seconded that we grant this application. All those in favour of granting, please show. Those against, that is unanimous. The application has been granted. Thank you. And we're going to go to page 76. That's Altrincham Boys Grammar School, Marlborough Road in Bowden. And do we have Councillor Young and we have Mr. Hugden. Mr. Hugden, would you like to come first? If I could take a seat. But before you begin, we've got an introduction from Miss Milner.
thank you, Chair. The application site relates to part of the existing grass school playing fields to the north of the site adjacent to the end of Seddon Road and Heath Road. A modern sports hall was erected at the site following approval in 2006, together with the creation of an artificial sports pitches and new car parking. This building is now known as the Grammar and it offers sports facilities to both school and community. The school is in a predominantly residential area and is adjacent to the Hale station to the northwest and the Bowden to northeast conservation areas, but no parts of the school grounds are within these areas. Permission was granted in December 2017 for the creation of an artificial grass pitch to form a full-size playing enclosure, including a new perimeter bull-stop fence, new hard-standing areas for pedestrian access, goal storage, maintenance access, and new flood lighting. Hours of use of the new pitch were conditioned to be only for those between the hours of 9 a.m. and 7 p.m. Monday to Friday, and 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturday, with no usage on Sundays and bank holidays. The associated floodlights were also restricted to these times. This application seeks to vary this condition under a Section 73 minor material amendment application to allow for extended hours, seeking to increase the hours of use from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Saturdays, and 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Sundays. The main issues to be considered relate to the impact of hours on the extended hours of operation on residential amenity. We also have to consider the adjacent heritage assets of the conservation, together with any highways impact, and also an assessment against the Sport England policy. Officers accept that the proposal would secure sport-related benefits for the local community, and the justification submitted by the applicant relates to the hours are necessary to receive the funding for the proposal. However, officers do not consider that the proposed hours would be acceptable and would have an unacceptable impact on neighbouring residential properties, specifically Seddon Road and Heath Road. Whilst when after this application came up before, options were considered with later hours. However, the only way officers considered the impact of the use could be mitigated was through the restriction of the hours. Whilst we accept there'd be no further impact on the highways network or the adjacent conservation area, we do think there would be significant harm to the adjacent residential properties. The application comes towards committee with significant local interest. We've received approximately 40 letters of objection and close to 140 letters of support, as detailed in your committee report. However, officers are of the view that the application should be reviewed as outlined in the officer report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Milner. Mr Hugden, you have 3 minutes. Thank you, Mr Duggan. If you'd like to return to your seat. Councillor Young. You have 5 minutes, Councillor Young.
Thank you for letting me speak, Mr. Chairman. There've been quite a lot of interest in this application. You said, I believe, that it was about 140 letters in support of it and 40 to object. Well, I'd just like to make the point that the people who are objecting to this application are the local residents who live around it. The people who've written in support of the letters are parents who are responding to an appeal. I believe a letter was sent to all parents by the headmaster of the school saying, would you send a letter to the planning office in support of the pitch, without any question being made of the time and the noise and any of the other facilities. It's just a point maybe that should be considered. The residents who are living there are all in houses that were purchased many, many years ago and have been there for a long time. They're not against activity in the school time on the school pitch. But what is alarming them is this creep to commercialize the pitch. I mean, there's a very big difference between a rugby league match with a couple of hundred supporters to an inter-school match, or maybe a school fair or something like that. So they're perfectly happy with school activities. It's the extra activity that I think is disturbing people. Not to mention the occasional language that they hear when the adults are playing on the pitch. There is a claim that was made, I think, by the acoustic. It's come under paragraph 37, I think, which says there's going to be this acoustic fence built round, which means that it will be penetrate into the bedrooms on the first floor when people are trying to sleep at night. And the point made, as I said in this paragraph, is what would come out if the adults are playing in league matches or something similar, which could happen if you do grant the hours. That intermittent, short, elevated noise is more harmful than a general background noise. And that is why they're so concerned about being disturbed late at night. Detailed discussions have taken place between residents, school councillors and the highways in 2017, and a very reasonable compromise have agreed on how that things could be managed. Well, this application, if granted, will go completely against this agreement. And if the time is extended, there'll be no break during school holidays, etc., as the proposal is intended to attract a massive influx from clubs and teams from a wide area and will be a purely commercial undertaking. There are road infrastructures which are already inadequate for current use. One resident has asked if we really do have to wait for a child to be killed in all the chaos of traffic on the road that can occasionally happen if any more activity of this sort takes place. It would be good if you could observe and take the officer's recommendation to refuse. And if you could, I don't know whether you're allowed to consider the point that Mr. Hagan made. When we were last sitting, I was making a similar speech to you about 11 months ago. Am I going to have to come again next year and the year after and the year after that? Because you're going to get pretty fed up of me. Anyway, thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Councillor Young. We don't get fed up with you, Councillor Young. I'd like to return to your seat. Do we have Miss Sherratt, please? Miss Sherratt? I'd like to take a seat, and you have 3 minutes, Miss Sherratt.
Okay. Good evening, councillors. My name is Jo Charrett and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Trafford Leisure, here tonight with a joint application with Urmston Grammar School for boys. I'm pleased to be here tonight to speak in favour of this application, which will make a significant contribution to the health and well-being of Trafford residents, but also benefit the current and future students of the school. Public Health England guidelines is clear. Increase physical activity and health outcomes will improve. For this to happen, we need more facilities. We need to inspire people and provide a space that brings about change. To be active and for people to really understand what it means to take responsibility for their well-being. Our application seeks to bring a new pitch to the Oakle area to help support the council's corporate plan and to meet the current unmet demand for football. There is funding in place to create this additional recreational space. However, it's subject to the facility being accessible to the community. Without extending the opening hours of this previously approved pitch, we would fail to improve on health outcomes for our residents, but as importantly, this pitch wouldn't be viable. We know the national figures, 29% of adults are obese, and over 100,000 people in Trafford are overweight or obese. When we look at our younger generation, 33% of our children are inactive. 32% of our 10 and 11-year-olds are overweight, obese, and inactive. The council's playing pitch strategy identifies a shortfall of 7 full-size 3G pitches, and 2 are needed in the area that we're talking about for this pitch. We note there were no objections related to noise or otherwise to the existing operation of the 3G pitch at the Grammar until the application was submitted for the 4G in 2017. With regard to the comments from the pollution section, we would like to clarify that the only way to assess noise in an objective manner is with a quantitative assessment of noise levels. Our noise consultants did make inquiries with the council about how a qualitative assessment could be undertaken. However, they were not able to suggest an appropriate methodology. We are confident that our assess demonstrated that there will be no greater quantitative impact during the proposed extended hours than during the currently permitted hours when considering only noise. Notwithstanding this, and listening to what's been said, we are prepared to accept a compromise position of 9 p.m. closing time on weekdays. And something we wouldn't want to do, but again, perhaps step 1 is more important than all of the outcomes, is that we reduce the size of the pitch. We look to focus on football and not rugby, which would bring the boundary that impacts more so suggested on the properties at the end, would bring that back by 10 metres. I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Cherritt. I'd like to return to your seat. Ms. Coley is going to give us some information. Ms. Coley.
Noted the position in terms of compromise. Any proposal to reduce the size of the pitch is not the application before members this evening. That would require a different planning application. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Coley. Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure if Mrs. Coley's been looking at my notes, but for the second time this evening, she's just said exactly the same thing that I was going to say, given another 30 seconds or so. In terms of this application, I'm going to be backing the officer recommendation to refuse. The hours which are being looked at in terms of the extension are far too large. They take it. I mean, we're not talking a minor adjustment here. We're talking very much a wholesale change in the way that this site is being used. And whilst I thank Ms. Sherritt for the lecture on health and the reasons why this should be put into place, I'm more than capable of working that kind of thing out for myself. In terms of the health impacts, yes, I accept that there will be health benefits to any sporting facility, regardless of which kind it is. And that's something that we must take into account. However, given the circumstances, given the proximity to the local housing, I think that there is a very one-sided argument to be made here. The positive health impacts are overwhelmingly outmatched by the impact on the immediacy of the local residents, and I couldn't possibly support them as they are here. In terms of the compromises that were put forward, again, the 1 hour reduction during the day, beautifully magnanimous, so this may be, it is woefully insufficient and quite frankly doesn't even come close to addressing the issues that we have in front of us now. And as Mrs. Coley has pointed out, also the offer to amend the size of a pitch essentially makes this an entirely different application. So I'm afraid Councillor Mrs. Young, yes, that would mean you coming back for another occasion. Much though I would love to see you be here, I can't say that unless the pitch was dramatically reduced beyond the level that was being suggested, I still think we may have a problem if the hours of the operation were anywhere near the one that we're talking now. So I can't hold out any hope that I will be able to change my opinions on it at that stage. With that said, Chairman, I think I've been through more or less everything I need to say. Obviously, I will be voting in favour of officer recommendation, and indeed I'm more than happy to propose the refusal to help move things along. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Councillor Jerome.
I'll agree with Councillor Bunting in what he said. I mean, do some mistimed challenges and find the language directed towards myself was sometimes acute. And I think there will be more adults playing in the evening, and residents will get this type of language, and it will be sporadic, and I think it will be disruptive to their lives. So I would tend to totally agree with residents on this, and I think their needs should be taken first. So I'd agree with the points that Councillor Bunting has made, but would also back what residents have said, and I'll be supporting the officer recommendation on this.
Thank you, Councillor Jerome. Anybody else? Councillor Minnis.
So again, in complete agreement of the fact that, I mean, to have a pitch open till 10 o'clock is absolutely absurd in the week. And my children go to bed at 8 o'clock on a school night. That's clear that poor residents around there their children are not going to be able to go to bed at 8 o'clock, are they, with random shouting going on? I don't think that it's fair on any of the residents nearby. And in terms of health and being, children being more active, there are other things that the children could be doing as well. And they could be doing them in the day. So no child needs to be necessarily up at 10 o'clock running around a pitch and causing more and more noise. I don't think it will be children. I think it'll be adults. I think it's a business. I don't think it's for the children. I'll be supporting officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cordingley.
I'm going to be consistent and be contrary again, because it seems to me that in granting permission for these pitches, we accepted that this was the right thing in this place to have football and rugby, and the need for the physical sports right through the borough, but particularly in Altrincham, given everything that's gone on. I just think it's not trivial to provide sport. It's an absolute necessity. And I cannot back the officer's recommendation. I think we've provided this facility. Public money has gone into these pitches, and we should be providing it for the whole of the neighbourhood.
Thank you, Councillor Cordingley. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I attended this school and am consequently quite familiar with the site, and the plot of land where the grounds are located are sandwiched on either side by residential development. And I just think that if I were one of those residents, having to put up with the use in winter months of floodlights, potentially up until 10 p.m, it would really wind me up. So I'm minded to agree with the officer recommendation. I don't think it's a reasonable proposal before us this evening. Well, I did wonder, Mr. Huggan, in his comments, queried whether we'd be able to sort of put a time limit on whether or not that's not possible. Well, just wanted to clarify that, but no, I'm happy. I don't think the proposal's been seconded yet, so I'm happy to formally second that we refuse the application.
Thank you for that, Councillor Williams. Councillor Winstanley.
I'm also going to speak in favour of officer recommendation. I completely accept the health arguments put forward by Trafford Leisure, but exercise does not need to take place in this part of town. We are closing facilities in other parts of the borough, and I'm also minded to listen to what the local residents are saying, because if I live close to this facility, I would not be very happy at all at the extension of the hours. So I speak in favour of accepting officer recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting.
If I just want to make one brief point, thank you, Chairman. Just to assist my contrary colleague to my right, we are not suggesting that this site should not be used for sport. You say that the sport facilities are very important, and indeed they can go ahead and have their sports facility. It is merely the hours of operation that we're talking about here, and simply limiting them. Those were limited by the previous application. That you say we accepted it previously. Yes, we did accept it previously. I was on the committee when we accepted it previously, but we put limits on the hours of operation for the same reasons that we're suggesting those limits should be there now, to allow the facility to be there, to allow the sport to take place, yet at the same time limit the impact upon the residents. Nothing has changed. Therefore, my opinion has not changed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Before Councillor Cording comes back again, it's been moved in second. In my haste. It's been moved in second that we refuse this application. All those in favour of refusal, please show. And those against? One, Councillor Corley, that application has been refused. Thank you. We're going to go to page 122, page 94. That's 122 Framingham Road in Hale. And Miss Milner's going to give us an introduction to this. Okay.
Thank you.
Miss Milner.
This application relates to a two-storey semi-detached property in Brooklands located on Framingham Road at the junction with Wood Road. The proposal is for alterations to the front boundary treatment, including relocation of the pedestrian and vehicle access gate, along with the erection of first floor rear extensions and associated external alterations. The main considerations are the design of the proposal, the impact on the surrounding residential amenity, and highway safety. Officers have considered all elements as outlined in the report, and of the review that the design is suitable for the building and the local area, and that it has been designed to meet council policy so not to have a detrimental impact on residential amenity. Also, the changes to the boundary treatment are considered acceptable from a design point of view, but also from a highway safety perspective. We have received 4 objections, and the application was called to committee by Councillor Carey in support of those objections. However, subject to the conditions outlined in your report, officers are of the view that the application does meet council policy and therefore should be approved.
Thank you, Miss Milner. Mr. Gale, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you and good evening. I'm Mr. Gale. I live at number 2 Wood Road, which is the property adjoining. 122 Framingham Road. And I'm here representing 4 of the neighbours, groups of neighbours who've come this evening. We have numerous points. A bit of background on myself. I own a property developing business called Hale Properties based in Sale. I make my living out of building extensions, renovating people's houses, etc. And currently have 2 of my own clients on Framingham Road at the moment that I am accommodating with their extension. So I'm pretty clued up on building regulations, and I work with Trafford quite regularly in regard to that. The concerns we have are basically it's the proximity, first of all, to 120 Framingham Road, as it's looking out on their side garden. I know the plans have been amended, but I still feel that the council have recommended it, saying it's not overbearing, but I totally disagree with that, with the height of it and how close it is to the boundary. I feel it's over proportioned in respect to that issue I've just said. We don't feel it's in keeping with the original character and style of the building. The property has already been dramatically extended, as has my own, in a similar manner without the rear story extension. And if the applicant had applied for a side story extension because of the nature of the plot, I wouldn't really have any objection to it. The plot is on such an angle that my garden and their garden meet at a triangle position at the back. And because of this, that's another point we think it's really overbearing because of the angle that the gardens are, and the amount of space that it's taking off the rear elevation of that property, which is then looking out over my property and 120 Framingham Road. And I think that's all I have to say on that at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Gale.
Thank you
return to your seat. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Carey, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you for listening to me. I'd really appreciate it if Councillor Courtney would continue to be contrary this evening. Daughter's property on either side and further along. Mr. Gale spoke about lots of things. I'm going to reiterate some of them, but also highlight some other things, I think, as well. I think there is a legitimate concern here that this property could, in the future, be turned into a HMO. The report does note this. It says that no information received to suggest that this would be the case. However, I'd like the officers, please, to confirm that should a proposal like this nature be brought forward, that the Article 4 directive in place that occurs across the whole borough would be enacted, i.e. it would have to get permission from this committee to happen. The problems in this development are at the rear. They have a very, very unusual shape. They're very, very, because of the developments that's happened already, they're very, very small. And I would consider them to be, this application to be an overdevelopment. And I think we should give more weight than what the report says to this unusual shape and the impact that this is going to have on neighbours on both sides. I was late this evening because I had parents' evening, so I've only just looked at this report as the meeting was going on, but more neighbours have discussed about this overdevelopment point and the detrimental impact on their privacy, their right of privacy. This development, by its proximity to the neighbours and scale, would be massively overbearing and dominant to the rear. As I said at the start, the neighbours have said lots of points, and I've raised some to why I think this application should be refused. And I truly respectfully ask that you support Mr. Gale and the neighbours and refuse this application. I think we need to think about our roles of what the chairman always says at the beginning in regards to our local knowledge, to what the next door neighbours are saying on both sides and further along the street. So I really would appreciate it if you could support the refusal of this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carey. Ms Mills is going to give us some information.
Just in regards to the point where it's about the HMO, yes, it would be covered by the Article 4. So if they wanted to change to a HMO, they would require planning permission.
Thanks for that. Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chairman. For the first time this evening, I'm finding myself at odds with officer recommendation. Perhaps council accordingly is starting to rub off on me. I don't know. I do agree with the comments that have been made that the unusual site layout in terms of the plot shape does have a significant impact upon this application. In terms of the development being pushed to the rear of the property, I can fully understand why they're seeking to do this. They're trying to maintain as much of their property to the land to the side to keep their garden as open as possible. But in so doing, they are creating an issue in terms of their relationship to the neighbouring buildings, because I think that we talked earlier about the overbearing impact of something being towards the edge of the plot, and I think in some ways this is an issue here as well. The height of in fact, it's two-story, along with the fact that it is to the very edge of the boundary, that it then comes very close to the rear properties to the rear. This does have a significant detrimental impact upon the amenity of the neighbours to the rear. It is going to be overbearing, and it is going to be unpleasant to live near. If they were, as one of the objectors said, if they were extending to the side of the property, then it wouldn't be so much of an issue in this way. So I do think that there is a fine line to be marked in this, but I don't think that line, whilst it might be a fine line, I don't think that is an invisible line, and I think this application does step over that line. So I think, for the reasons that I've said, for the amenity impact due to the close proximity of the extension to the rear and to the height of it, it will be very much an oppressive and over dominant feature. I think it will have a significant impact upon the amenity value of the neighbours, and for that reason, Chairman, I will be proposing that we reject officer recommendation and refuse this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Councillor Jerome.
I just wanted a clarification on one of the objections. It says 2 protected trees will need to come down at the front of the building. I just wondered whether we could...
Protected trees, which is clarified in the report. So any of the tree removal could be carried out. I believe there will be some removal, but they're not protected. And there is proposed planting. However, for residential extensions, we don't see it necessary to add landscaping conditions when they're not protected trees.
Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be agreeing with Councillor Bunting, and I will be opposing officer recommendations. I think this site is already overdeveloped, and I think this makes it even more overdeveloped. There's a tiny garden at the rear, and this extension will envelop it, particularly on the neighbours who have extended themselves. But it's this application as the situation is now. And I cannot, looking at that development, support it. And I'm surprised, to be honest, that it's being proposed to us to support it, and I will be opposing it tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Minnis.
I've got an issue with it being a double story. I think it's going to there is going to be blockage of light at the back to the neighbours. And I don't, whilst I think a single story is sort of okay, but a double story isn't really. I think I'm going to have to go on the refuse side of this, because I don't think it's, when you look at the plot, I don't see how that's right for the neighbours on either side, but especially the adjoining property. I can't see how it's okay. Is it just that it's under permitted development? Is that what it is? That
Ms. Milner.
Do you mean, is the rear extension already under permitted development? The proposal?
The proposal of it going double story?
No, it's a planning application.
Yeah, okay, it's a planning application. Sorry. So does it not breach rules? No.
No, the depth of the extension is fully in accordance with our policy. We set out in one of our policies, we do consider site considerations, but first floor extensions are set out in policy what we do and don't support.
happy with that, Councillor Minnis? Have a think about it. We'll come back to you. Councillor Dr. Barclay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're told, I mean, it's obvious from the site, but we're told that it's an unusual shape, and I think we really have to go with our officers' very skilled view of things. That, you know, basically, if they feel that it's within the guidelines and permitted development, then I think I have to accept that. And I think we also have to bear in mind that if we are going to refuse it, then we open at the council to an appeal. And I think there's uncertainty about whether we would be successful with that. So I'm more than happy to be going with our skilled officers' recommendation. Thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Milner's going to come
Just to clarify, it is not permitted development. Permitted development relates to a specific type of development. This is development which requires planning permission. What we're saying is we consider it to be in accordance with our policy.
Thank you, and that's what I meant. Sorry, it was a mistake on my behalf. Sorry.
Councillor Patel.
I mean, this seems like a pretty bread and butter type of application that comes before officers. It's been called in by, within the rights of local councils to call in these applications. But the discussion here probably shows why we don't get into this level of assessment, and that we, as Councillor Barclay said, should trust officers' judgment, who have obviously taken into account the site and the planning specifications and requirements. And I can't see that there's a place for this committee to overrule that decision-making process. So I accept the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I disagree with both Councillor Dr. Barclay and Councillor Patel. In terms of the plot of, and to address the point made by my colleague opposite, yes, if this were a standard shaped plot of land, then this would probably be acceptable. But I feel that it is that the officers have not given due consideration to the highly unusual plot shape and the relationship, therefore, to the buildings to the rear. In terms of the comments made by Councillor Patel, that is exactly our remit. That is what we're here for. Yes, the officers are too, but at the end of the day, when an application comes before us, it is our job to determine the application. That is the point of this committee. And yes, we do occasionally disagree with the officers. In the majority of cases, we will agree with them. If we didn't agree with them in the majority of cases, that would mean either the officers didn't know what they were doing, we were completely crazy, or both. So you would expect, in the majority of occasions, for us to agree with the officers. However, that is not a unanimous state of affairs. On this occasion, I think whilst there is always a balance to be struck, the officers have gone on one side of the balance and I'm going on the other side of the balance. The way I often do is, would I want this next to me? Would I be happy if I were one of those neighbours to the rear? Or would I be saying, what on earth is going on? If this were a single story application, then it probably would be okay. But the double story in that location, given the proximity to the neighbours to the rear, I think is an unacceptable impact upon the amenity of the neighbours. And I stand by my viewpoint that I put forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Patel, did you want to come back in?
Well, just to say to Councillor Bunting, not getting into an argument, but he says that the unusual site shape has not been taken into account by officers, and the officers are saying they have taken the size, shape and specifics of this site into consideration, and they consider that what's being proposed is compliant with planning policy. So it's just an opinion, isn't it, really?
Thank you for that. Can I make a comment? Page 99, paragraph 11. So SPD 4 says that there should be a 2 metre distance between a 2-storey extension and the boundary. Am I correct in saying that, Ms. Milner? Page 99, paragraph 11. Yeah, the rear extension adjacent to number 120 Framingham Road would have a projection of 4.92 metres from the rear elevation.
So the point that Councillor Walsh is making is that what SPD4 says, which is supporting planning document 4 on household extensions. It says we allow first floor extensions that extend 1.5 metres from the rear elevation plus the distance to the boundary. So adjacent to the neighbouring property, the adjoining property at 120, it projects 1.5 metres plus it's set off 0.3 to the boundary, so it meets that policy. In relation to the extension that is deeper at 4.2 metres, what we'd say is the distance to the boundary varies quite significantly. So if you took it at the base of the extension closest to the property, I believe it's 5.5 to the shared boundary, but it goes up to being as close as 1.6 to the boundary. However, the mitigating circumstances are the relationship to the property. I can't. If I had the site location, I'd show you. But effectively, the rear elevation of the proposed first floor extension will not project beyond the rear elevation of the neighbouring non-adjoining property. Therefore, the policy is not considered to be met, because we're looking at the relationship to the rear elevation, not just the boundary. So the extension will not extend beyond the rear elevation of the neighbouring plot.
See if I've understood this properly. So that corner, I was at number 120 on Sunday, and spoke to the neighbours. That corner will be 1.6 metres from the boundary. So that corner will be 1.6 metres from the boundary with 120. So that will be, it will not satisfy the 2 metre boundary mark. Now, what the officers are saying, because it's at an angle, it goes away to 2.2 metres further along that second. Is that not correct?
No, can you put the site plan, not that one, the proposed site plan. Okay, so we've not got it. So, there we go. So, so the extent, so what we're looking at from here to here is approximately 5.5. This is the ground floor. The proposed first floor extension will go to 4.2, a bit higher than I can read. From there to there, I believe it was 1.6, but from there to the boundary, if it's straightforward, would be 2.2. But from here to here, it's 5.2. So it's a sliding scale of the impact. But what we're saying is this, at first floor, the extension will go to just above the 10, and that will not go beyond the rear elevation of this property.
Right, can I stand up? So we're all doing that. What I'm getting at is that distance from there to there is not 2.2 metres, is it?
No.
My reading of SPD4 today was that should be 2 metres from there to there.
No, the 2 metre gap that you're looking at is specifically when we're looking at corner plots where you'd be facing, say, the side of a road. So going back to Green Road earlier today, where they were developing a classic corner plot. So when somebody's looking to build a 2-storey side extension on a corner plot like that, we say you should be in 2 metres from the boundary. That's what SPD4 is. But SPD4 is guidance, and it sets out dimensions. And as shown, it's not black and white. So we take them as guide and then make our assessment.
Well, let me stand up again. So I'm very sympathetic to the neighbours next door, and I don't take that. That's not an easy thing to do. I stood there. If that extent, we talk about the angles making it easier. If you stand there in the neighbour's garden, you see that side, you see that side. If anything, it makes the extension look bigger. If it was parallel, if the house was the other way around and it was parallel with the boundary, that would be, to me, that would be easier to live with. Because it's at an angle, whereas the officers say that makes it easier to live with, that actually makes it more difficult because you can see that and you can see that side of the extension. Which is, I think, really, is what Councillor Bunting was saying earlier. So it's been seconded, Councillor Bunting. I'll be supporting the use of this application. But if anybody else would like to comment, please. And apologies, I've not put my microphone on, and people wouldn't have not been able to hear me on the YouTube channel when I was stood up there. Anybody else like to comment? No? So it's been moved and seconded that we refuse this application. All those in favour of refusal, please show. And
Can I just clarify the reason for refusal is as set out by Councillor Bunting, which is the impact on amenity, the close proximity to the boundary and the over-dominance and height.
those are the reasons. Those are the reasons, yes.
And with specific reference to the unusual shape of the plot, because there needs to be something why you're not applying SPD for. Yeah,
I
that's
think
fine.
that plot shape is key. It's everything. As we always say, context is everything, and the plot shape is part of the context.
Okay, the application has been refused, and that's the end of the meeting, everybody. Thank you.
Need to say Bluebridge.
Sorry, number 55. Shh, can we a bit of quiet, please? Sorry, we're going back to page 55. 19 Blueberry Road in Bowden has been withdrawn.
It has.
Yeah. Any other business to discuss? Councillor Cordingley?
I just want to make a point that once again, I cycled up there yesterday. So if it was withdrawn before yesterday, I'll be mounted cross.
Thank you, Councillor Cordingley. Thank you.
In our defence, Councillor, it is only round the corner from Bow Green Road, so you didn't have to go that far out your way.